الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
استووا. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. هل أتاك حديث الغاشية وجوه يومئذ خاشعة عاملة ناصبة تصلى نارا حامية تسقى من عين آنية ليس لهم طعام إلا من ضريع لا يسمن ولا يغني من جوع وجوه يومئذ ناعمة لسعيها راضية في جنة عالية لا تسمع فيها لاغية فيها عين جارية فيها سرر مرفوعة وأكواب موضوعة ونمارق مصفوفة وزرابي مبثوثة أفلا ينظرون إلى الإبل كيف خلقت وإلى السماء كيف رفعت وإلى الجبال كيف نصبت وإلى الأرض كيف سطحت فذكر إنما أنت مذكر لست عليهم بمسيطر إلا من تولى وكفر فيعذبه الله العذاب الأكبر إن إلينا إيابهم ثم إن علينا حسابهم. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. ألم نشرح لك صدرك ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي أنقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك فإن مع العسر يسرا إن مع العسر يسرا فإذا فرغت فانصب وإلى ربك فارغب. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Is it good? No, it's good. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهديه الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Inshallah ta'ala, we continue with Kitab At-Tawheed, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit and to bless our gatherings. And the most valuable thing in one's life is to seek knowledge. And the most, or the highest level after prophethood, as Abdullah ibn Mubarak rahimahullah, he said, is bathul ilm, to spread the knowledge. And this knowledge, al-ilm, is ibadah, is an act of worship. So when someone is seeking knowledge, he is in state of ibadah. He is worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by seeking the knowledge of Al-Qur'an wa Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, because this is what ilm is. What's meant by ilm or knowledge, as it's been mentioned before, al-ilmu qala Allah, qala Rasuluhu, qala al-sahaba, laysa bit-tamwih. To the end of what Shaykh Santani rahimahullah mentioned, which is al-ilm is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, what the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, what the Sahaba radiallahu anhum said, without ambiguity. It's wahi from Allah. So, kalamun muhkam, very clear, straightforward. We just need to know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the owner of all things, and He revealed the final revelation to mankind, to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Both types of wahi, revelation, has been protected from any change when it comes to the preservation of this wahi and this deen. The Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Both wahi from Allah, and that's what even a Muslim would get to know what ilm from the other things that people can call it ilm. So when someone is exalting the two sources of wahi, Al-Qur'an wa Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and with the statements of the Sahaba, with the statements of the Tabi'een, the Imma of this deen, and as the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he made it very clear that for those who are saved from all kinds of deviation, not necessarily the individuals, because a person should not praise himself, but rather what is the actions that would make the person saved. When he said alayhi salatu wasalam, وَسَتَفْتَرِقُ أُمَّتِي عَلَى 73 فِرْقَةً, and my ummah will split to 73 sects. When he was asked, what is this? He says, مَا أَنَا عَلَيْهِ وَأَصْحَابِ الْيَوْمِ, what me and my companions are upon today. And that's how simple the matter is. This deen is to go back and see how was things at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, Qur'an and Sunnah, and that's how the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And this is basically what we see in the book. So to put aside the deviant statements of people when they start, and this is the ways of the people of al-batil or the people of falsehood, when they don't have something to oppose the truth, they will just say things. As they used to say about the Prophet ﷺ, sahir, majnoon, sorcerer, madman, things like this. Nothing of an intellect even to oppose the haqq, or to oppose the truth. So they would spread all kinds of things that has no basis to it. So when we look into things and when we seek knowledge, أعرف الحق تعرف أهله. If you know the truth, you'll know the people of the truth. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us sincerity and to help us achieve this matter of ilm. And especially in the time that we live in, this is such a great ibadah and mujahada and struggling and striving, that those who have the means to do it, they should not belittle it. They should do the best they can to be always busy with matters of ilm. We reached chapter number 8. Chapter number 8, and I see some of you have some books with the English in it, so you can help me out, inshallah ta'ala, with some of the translations. I don't have the English in front of me. So number 8, ما جاء في الرقى والتمائم. ما جاء في الرقى والتمائم. The ulama rahimahumullah, when they put a title to something, they mean what they say, and that's because of the ilm that they have. So usually the titles are very precise, related to what it's mentioned. So when he says ما جاء في الرقى والتمائم, what came, Ja'a means came, literally. Something, fulan ja, someone came. Ja'a Muhammad, that means Muhammad came. So ma ja'a, what came, meaning in the text or the revelation or the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with regards to ar-ruqa wa tama'im. Ar-ruqa, as we will see, these are basically as ruqya, which is well known among the Muslims, the things that are to be recited for means of cure, mainly. Something that is recited or something that people would do other than the physical means that we know, like medicine and things like this, for the purpose of to have a physical effect, like cure, for example, from a physical disease. So what came in this subject, because it might be, some of it might be permissible, some of it might not be permissible. And at-tama'im is the talismans or the amulets and the things that people would hang and things of that nature. So he did not give the verdict or the ruling in the title because it will show inshallah ta'ala in the chapter. And adding to what we had mentioned before, because these are foundations to understand these matters, that at-Tawheed of Allah, the oneness of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the most important thing. And to worship none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have the hearts fully relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there is always the subject of the means that confuses many people on the face of earth when it comes to how to deal with the means versus is that something that is permissible or not, basically. So as we said before, briefly, without repeating everything that was mentioned before, there are two sets of means. You remember the two sets of, what is the first one? Anybody remember? Al-asbab, physical means. Al-asbab al-kawniyya, physical means. That means you don't need too much of a revelation to teach the human beings how to take the physical means. If you're hungry, eat. If you're thirsty, drink. Right? That's very obvious. So these are the physical means. Medicines and things like this. And these physical means, it has to also abide by the rules from Allah. So it's not permissible to take a haram mean for a benefit that you're seeking. It has to be halal, of course. The other sets of means, which is al-asbab al-shar'iyya, the religious means. Meaning that someone walking in the street might not know these means. It has to refer to the wahy from Allah. So something comes into Qur'an and the authentic sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that tells you that if you take this mean, which is not a physical one, there is an effect. It has an effect physically or in the hereafter. So basically the ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a mean to enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, halal and haram. And here in this subject, when a person make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for physical cure, for example, this is a mean. It's not a physical mean, but it's a religious mean. We get to know it from the religion, from the wahy from Allah. And one of which is the ruqa. Al-ruqa is when you recite something, whether it's Qur'an, adiyah, dua from the Prophet ﷺ, or more as it will come inshallah ta'ala, as seeking from that a physical cure of disease or something like this. It's permissible in many cases, and some cases or some ways to understand what makes it forbidden. It's something that we need to learn. We talked about before, when people take or they use the stars for means of knowing, for example, things in the future, this is an act of disbelief because the stars has nothing to do with the life that we live in. It does not have, it's not even a mean of rain or this or that or someone is going to be born or any of these matters, because it's neither physical means nor it is religious means. So that's in the same subject. So what is in al-ruqa? والتمائم and التمائم in general, we talked about the hadith in the previous chapter. من تعلق تميمة فلا أتم الله له. Whoever hangs a tamima, may Allah does not make his affairs complete or what he seeks becomes reality, which is basically what they used to hang things around their neck, around their arms, and still people do these types of things, seeking some blessings, seeking protection, seeking cure, and it's not a physical mean, nor it's a religious mean, so that means it's a matter of shirk, associating partners with Allah. The heart becomes attached to something that is of no reality to it whatsoever. So when we see here the evidences, we have basically six points or six evidences, hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and some of the statements from the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. And this is how it even, the way the book is, it teaches us what ilm is. So that we're not talking about books of philosophy or some people's reasons and intellect. We're talking about wahi from Allah. So the first one, he says في الصحيح, which is authentic, and we'll talk about the narration of it. عن أبي بشير الأنصاري رضي الله عنه أنه كان مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في بعض أسفاره. I will read the hadith first and then go through the wordings of it. فأرسل رسولا ألا يبقين في رقبة بعير قلادة من وتر أو قلادة إلا قطعت. So he was with the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام مع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في بعض أسفاره. بعض means some. In some of his asfar, asfar is the plural of safar. In some of the travelings of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, he was traveling. So he was with him. And his safar is called safar. Why? Because it yusfir an akhlaqness. It exposes the manners of the people, what's hidden. People usually, if you want to know someone, travel with him and do some form of dealings with money with him. As Umar radiallahu anhu, he said. Some brothers are very kind and nice and everything, but once you get into business with them, the matter is different. Or when you travel with someone. So he was with the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام in some of his travelings. فأرسل رسولا. The Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام sent a messenger to the people, those who are with him, to say something, to convey something, a message to everyone. ألا يبقين في رقبة بعير. ألا يبقين, like that, nothing is to be left. Al-baqa is when something is left. So ألا يبقين, nothing in the necks of a ba'ir or a camel or any cattle. Do not leave anything around the necks of the cattle. قلادة من وتر أو قلادة إلا قطعت. No qilada. Al-qilada is anything that is put around the neck of collar. You know, when someone hangs or put a collar around their neck, it's called qilada. So the narration says, whether it's qilada min watar or qilada. Do not leave any qilada, any collar, anything around the necks of the cattle unless you quti'at, unless you tear it, cut it off. Or the other narration, qilada min watar, a specific type of qilada from watar. Al-watar is also that what they take from the ba'ir, they take from the cattle, whether it's part of their insides or something like this, that they would make it around the necks of the cattle. And they would do that as a mean of protection. That's why the Prophet ﷺ ordered for all of these things to be cut off, because this has nothing to do with the means whatsoever. It's not means of protection or anything like this. So this is the first hadith, and he says for Sahih because the hadith is reported by Bukhari and Muslim. And he mentioned this here is because the Prophet ﷺ, he commanded for it to be إِلَّا قُطِعَتْ. Al-qata' is when you tear something. So which very obvious. What's the hukm here? What's the ruling here? Is it something that is then permissible for someone to have something like that around their cattle or the animals that they have? Of course not. So that means it's haram. And the Arabs, they used to do these types of things to push away the evil eye. So to push away the evil eye, they would put something like that. So the Prophet ﷺ forbade them of this. And he sent someone to call upon the people that to stay away from this. And this is how brief the matter is. And he says, وعن ابن مسعود, the second evidence, وعن ابن مسعود رضي الله عنه قال, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud رضي الله عنه, he said, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن الرقى والتمائم والتولة شرك. رواه أحمد وأبو داود. That he said, I heard the messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم saying, إن الرقى, indeed الرقى. So what is الرقى again? الرقى is the plural of ruqya. And ruqya is a word that almost everybody knows or heard it before, which is basically the word al-isti'adha. When you say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, you're seeking refuge in Allah. So al-ruqa is basically, sometimes they call it al-azaim, as it's going to be mentioned, or the means of seeking refuge or seeking protection that is mainly with kalam. It's mainly with speech. So something of means of refuge or means of protection that a person would seek by saying something. So this is mainly when the word ruqya is mentioned, It's mainly with saying something, and sometimes while saying, blowing the effect of the speech or wiping, but it's mainly about what a person would say. والتمائم, indeed الرقى, والتمائم, and as we said, the tamaim, anything that is hanging around the neck or any parts of the body for means of protection. والتولة, the word التولة here is introduced, which is, what is التولة? It's the same thing, but it's a specific means of sihr, basically, or sorcery, or something that they deal with, but it's specifically for the relationships between the husband and the wife. So they would do something for the wife so that her husband loves her more. Or they would do something for the wife, for the husband to love his wife more. Or, which is also, it is one of the forms of either the sarf or al-atf. A sarf is when they want the husband and the wife to be separated from one another. So something for the wife to hate her husband, or something for the husband to hate he cannot stand her, both ways. Or physically not able to have relations. These types of things with matters of sihr. Or sometimes they do this to have the opposite effect. And it's all matters of shirk, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, shirk. And of course, as-sihr, when it comes into the categories of as-sihr as it will come is kufr, is an act of disbelief. Because as-sihr or sorcery, people have to deal with the shayateen, with the jinn. And there is no way for them to deal with the shayateen and the jinn in matters of sihr, or black magic, or whatever they call it, unless they disbelieve in Allah. They have to. So as-sahir kafir, by the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, not the one that makes tricks with his hands and stuff like that. We're not talking about these people that make funny stuff. Those who deal with the jinn, they would never be given that by the jinn unless they disbelieve in Allah. And they would even curse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or do evil things with the Qur'an and things of that nature. So, but here this hadith is referring to these matters, al-ruqa wal-tama'im wal-tiwala, shirk, as the Prophet ﷺ said, and it's an authentic hadith reported by Imam Ahmad and Abi Dawood. And the Prophet ﷺ, he's the one that gives it this ruling or the hukm. That's what's the hukm of not all the ruqa here, the ruqa in this context, because there's other evidences that would show that there are permissible ruqa or means of seeking cure. But this what is known to the people of al-jahiliyyah, or the people of ignorance, that has to deal with matters of shirk. So the matters of al-ruqa, as the hadith in Sahih Muslim, very authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, لا بأس بالرقى ما لم تكن شركا. There's no, لا بأس, that means no harm. It's not haram for al-ruqa to recite something for means of cure, ما لم تكن شركا, as long as it's not shirk. And that's why the ulama, they put conditions for it, or principles for us to know or to differentiate between the ruqya that is shirk versus the ruqya that is permissible. Very briefly, shirk meaning a person, when he's making ruqya, he's seeking protection from a jinn, for example, or from shaitan, or from someone that is not present, or saying things that you don't understand what he's saying. Talasim, they call it. Things that does not make sense or no meanings to it. Whether it's they write it down, and some of these tama'im, when you open it, as we mentioned before, you would find things that doesn't make sense. Signs, some letters in different orders, all of that. This is all loyalty to the jinn and the shayateen and sihr and matters like this. The ruqa that are permissible, to make it clear inshallah without talking too much, as the ulama, they put conditions to it. First of all, it has to be it doesn't have to be limited from the Qur'an and the Sunnah, but it's best that it's from the Qur'an or the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the reason why it doesn't have to be only from the Qur'an and the Sunnah is because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when he said to the companions radiallahu anhum, اعرضوا علي رقاكم, present to me your ruqa, the things that you recite for these means. So then he said, أرقوا ما لم يكن شركا, and that's when he said, لا بأس بالرقى ما لم تكن شركا. He approved for them to make any dua that they want in general, as long as it's not shirk. As long as it's not shirk. So it has to be understood, clear statements. And some had given the condition that it has to be in the Arabic language to avoid the things that a person might not understand. So if someone doesn't know English, for example, and someone instead say, Allah, if someone says, oh Allah, cure so and so, this is dua. It's permissible to say something like this. But someone never heard English before, he might think that this is some ta'weed from shayateen or something like this. Right? So it's definitely to be safe, and no doubt about this, is to make the ruqya from the Qur'an. And the Prophet ﷺ used to make ruqya and make dua till the last 3 surahs were revealed. قُلْ اللَّهُ أَحَدْ قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ الْفَلَقِ قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ, especially in Mu'awwidhatan. Once they were revealed, the Prophet ﷺ would only make the ruqya by these surahs. So we have what is sufficient in the last 3 surahs of the Qur'an. Surah Al-Fatiha, one of the names of Al-Fatiha is Shafiyah, that it's cure in itself. Any verses in the Qur'an, anything from the Qur'an, Al-Qur'an shifa. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. We bring down from the Qur'an what is shifa, cure, and mercy to the believers. Shifa, cure to the hearts, and also lil abdan, shifa to the bodies. So when you recite Qur'an with the intention of cure, you recite Qur'an and you put your hand on the place that it hurts, that's fine, that's permissible. And it's actually a good thing for a person to do that to himself. Or to recite and then to blow the, after you recite, on the part of the body that you have pain in, or in your hands, and you wipe over it. And the Prophet ﷺ would do the last 3 surahs before he go to sleep. And he would spit lightly 3 times in his hands, and he would wipe his head and his body with it. So all of these things are permissible, of course. So, and as long as there's no shirk in it whatsoever. And then he says here, so this hadith states clearly that al-ruqa wa tama'im wa tiwala shirk. So the ruqa here has shirk in it, of course, the ways of the ways of the jahiliyyah, then it's matters of shirk. And then the third statement, or the third text, he says, وعن عبد الله ابن عكيم مرفوعا. مرفوعا, that means الرفع is when you put something high, or when you رفعت هذا, that means I elevated it or raised it up. As we know that, like, the chain of narrations is going from one generation to the other. One is higher than the other till you reach the Prophet ﷺ. So when a Sahabi says something, when a companion of the Prophet ﷺ says something, either he would say قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, the Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم said. So that's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, very clear. Or a Sahabi would say something without attributing this to the Prophet ﷺ. And either he said that, as that's the word marfu'an, that means he attributed what he said to the Prophet ﷺ. So it's not the statement of the Sahabi. He made it clear that this is what the Prophet ﷺ said. Or it might be a statement from the Sahabi, and it becomes an ijtihad, especially if it's an opinion, based on what his understanding is. And this is a huge subject, the statements of the Sahaba. If it's a matter of unseen, for example, the Sahabi would not talk about matters of unseen unless he have heard it from the Prophet ﷺ. So he won't talk about something in the hereafter from his own self. Even he might not say the Prophet ﷺ said, but he would never say it unless he have heard it from the Prophet ﷺ, or things that are very clear from the deen. So he says here marfu'an, that means this is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. That's the statement that he heard, or he attributed this to the Prophet ﷺ. Very simple words. Man ta'allaqa shay'an wukila ilayhi. And this is reported by Imam Ahmad and At-Tirmidhi. Man ta'allaqa shay'an. Ta'allaq, that means he hanged something. Ta'allaqa shay'an. And there is slight difference between when you say ta'allaq or allaq. Allaq is when you hang something, and ta'allaq also when you hang something. But when you add something to the words, it gives more meaning, or makes the meaning more intense. So someone hang something, you might hang something on the wall that is of no significance to you. Just hang something. Versus someone hangs something for a reason. So these types of things, people, they don't just put it on. No, they're putting it on, and the hearts are attached to it. There's a connection that they have. This is a mean of protection. This is a mean to protect them, to push away harm, to bring benefit, to push away the evil eye, all these types of things. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Man ta'allaqa shay'an, anything, left it open like this. So people can invent all kinds of things. Wukila ilayhi. Wukila ilayhi, that means this person will be entrusted to it. التوكل is to rely upon, right? التوكل على Allah is to rely upon Allah, right? So when it's in the passive tense, wukila, that person will be relied or made to rely upon it. And that thing that they hang, does it benefit or harm? No. So he's been basically given that reliance upon something that is of nothing whatsoever. We talked about that last time. It's like, the very easy example is when you lean against something, right? If that thing is removed, you will fall. This is how you're leaning towards it. So if it's something that is nothing whatsoever, you're standing like this and you rely on the air, you'll fall. So this is basically what happens when people with their hearts are relying upon other than Allah. And this is such an important hadith that it's not just about the ruqa and the tama'im and the amulets. This is a way of life. You have the khalq, you have the creation of Allah, and you have al-khaliq, the creator subhanahu wa ta'ala. The heart should never have a space for the creation of Allah. The heart is fully relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Physically, you deal with people and you ask people, you talk with people, you work for someone. You can use the word I depend on someone, but not in your heart. Physically do things, but in your heart you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the owner of all things. So therefore, من وكل إلى شيء وانتعلق بشيء وكل إليه. So as a rule, whoever relies upon something, he will be left to be entrusted to it, and it's not going to benefit the person, but rather the person should fully at all times rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be attached, the hearts to be attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. So this is also clear in the subject when it comes to matters of these types of ruqya, and that's why one of the conditions that the ulama said when it comes to the ruqya, that the heart should not rely upon it. So we said that it has to be no shirk in it, and that's why it's best to be from the Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and that's sufficient. It should be with things that are well known, the meaning of it is clear, not something that doesn't make sense. And number 3, that the heart is not relying upon it. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that gives the cure, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that protects, and it's nothing but a mean. Like all the means. The means, you do the means, you take the means, and the means has an effect by the will of Allah, right? It's not like those who would claim that the means has no effect, which is, if you don't mind, it's an important part of knowledge that we also need to know. Like some of the sects that deviated in the subject, like the Maturidis and the Ash'ira, for example. They would claim that the mean does not have an effect. That every time you take a mean, like when you drink, for example, or the famous example, you probably heard it when people given sometimes bayans or admonitions or whatever. They say the knife does not cut. Have you heard that before? The knife does not cut. It's that when the knife is put on the meat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in it the ability to cut, and it cuts. And people say, Allah, mashallah. This is wrong. There's no such a thing. The knife cuts. By the will of Allah, yes, of course. Everything is by the will of Allah. But the knife, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it as a mean that it cuts. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will for it, it doesn't cut. It won't cut yet. But not every time you put the blade is nothing. Basically what they say, that which is a very, this is the effect of philosophy and things like this. That the blade in itself does not do anything. It's the instant when you put it, then, and that's how they explain even the fire. When Ibrahim alayhi salam was thrown into the fire, قُلْنَا يَا نَارُ كُونِي بَرْدًا وَسَلَامًا عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ. They say the fire does not burn by itself. This is wrong. The fire burns. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created it. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will for it that it doesn't burn, it would never burn, like what happened to Ibrahim alayhi salam. But the issue of the means, right? The means, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created it as means. So there's nothing wrong for you to take the means. So take the means, but in your heart, you're not relying upon the mean. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make all the means that you take of no benefit whatsoever. You can take all the means to make money, to work, to reach a destination, all of that, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decree something else. So that's why the heart has to rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these types of tama'im also. So man ta'allaqa shay'an وُكِلَ إِلَيْهِ. And you can say it in a very clear statement that مَنْ وُكِلَ إِلَى غَيْرِ اللَّهِ, whoever is being given, I don't know how to say that, whoever is made to rely upon other than Allah, he is perished. And the dua of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك أستغيث أصلح لي شأني كله ولا تكلني إلى نفسي طرفة عين. يا حي يا قيوم, oh Allah, the حي, the قيوم, the ever living, everything is in need of Allah. برحمتك أستغيث, by your mercy I seek help and refuge in. أصلح لي, making dua to Allah, oh Allah, rectify all of my affairs and do not make me rely upon myself even for a blink of an eye. Even for a blink of an eye. And that's why they say whoever is wukila ila nafsi. Some people, they're left to rely upon themselves. As a result of this dua, whoever is made to rely upon himself, he will be perished. This is the halak. This is the destruction when someone is left to rely upon himself. No, rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the real strength. When a person would rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he take the means. So even oneself. And doesn't mean that a person should not have self-confidence and all of these things. No, you rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you take the efforts, and that makes you stronger than anyone else. Because Allah, everything is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what wukila ilayhi. The fourth evidence here, so that we don't take too much of your time. First of all, he says, وَالرُّقَى. That's part of what's mentioned in the book. No, I'm sorry, number... After he mentioned this hadith, he says, التمائم شيء يعلق على الأولاد عن العين. التمائم, something that is hanged on especially the young children, عن العين, to protect them from the evil eye. لكن إذا كان المعلق من القرآن. Pay attention to this, inshallah, because this is there's a issue here that has some differences of opinions. If المعلق, if what's hanged من القرآن, only from the Qur'an, nothing else but the Qur'an, فَرَخَّصَ فِيهِ بَعْضُ السَّلَفِ. Some of the Salaf, some of the early generations of Islam, رَخَّص فِيهِ. رَخَّص means that permitted it, if it's only Qur'an. وَبَعْضُهُمْ لَمْ يُرَخِّص فِيهِ. And some of them did not permitted it. So if it's only Qur'an, clearly Qur'an, and a person hangs it on the neck of his child, for example, only Qur'an. Some had permitted it and some had forbade it. ويجعله من المنهي عنه, and those who forbade it made it from what's forbidden. منهم ابن مسعود رضي الله عنه. From among those who forbade that, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud رضي الله عنه. So we can say, as a result of that, you can say that there's a valid differences of opinion. Not valid that both opinions are correct, because if someone says it's valid and someone says it's not valid, the truth is one. You cannot have both as right. So, but it's a valid differences of opinion. It's spacious enough for people. They don't have to fight with each other. But what is correct about this is, as he mentioned, those who said that it's still forbidden. For many reasons, one of which is this was never been done at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or the Sahaba radiallahu anhum would do this to their children, hang only Qur'an and things of that nature. And what was spacious enough for them, it's spacious enough for the entire ummah. So they had the means to protect themselves and their children and so on. And they didn't do these types of things. Plus, you add to it, is that a child have something like that. He goes to the bathroom. He drools on it. He does not respect what is being done. Another thing, as the ulama, they say, who would then in times of fitna and lack of knowledge, that would say that it's only Qur'an? Then it opens a huge gate for those who would write other things. And then it's covered, and people don't know if this is Qur'an or shirk. Right? So that's why the other opinion, which he mentions here, and this shows also the fairness of the people of knowledge, and what he said, and he said, and this is the second one which is forbidden because of that. وأن الرقى, the رقى وهي التي تسمى العزائم. العزائم from العزيمة is when it comes to matters of being recited. وخص منه الدليل ما خلا من الشرك. That it's, as long as it's free, does not have any shirk, then it's permissible. فقد رخص فيه رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من العين والحمى. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم gave the permission to make ruqya from the evil eye and from the al-huma, the fever and the like of this. And other hadith with diseases in general. So if someone with means of protection, the ruqya also either in the subject of protecting yourself on a daily basis, whether it's in the morning adhkar, the evening adhkar, before you go to sleep. And why the awlad are mentioned, the young children? Because the young children, they don't have means of protection for themselves. As a guardian, as a father, as a mother, you always make sure that you protect your child. You give them advices, you protect them from strangers and all of this, people that might want to harm them. And one of which also these types of things. And that's why if they're not able to read themselves, you read Qur'an on them. Before they go to sleep, you recite Qur'an on them. That's fine. Ayatul Kursi, the last 3 surahs. The Prophet ﷺ used to make mu'awwadat for Al-Hasan and Hussein. He would say, أعيذكما بكلمات الله التامة من كل شيطان وهمة ومن كل عين لامة. أعيذكما in the dual tense. I seek refuge in Allah for both of you. بكلمات الله التامة, with the perfect words of Allah. من كل عين لامة. أعيذكما بكلمات الله التامة من كل شيطان وهمة من كل عين لامة. From every shaitan, from every harmful things, and from every evil eye. So he would say that as a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for means of protection to them. So as long, again, as he mentioned, as it's not shirk. At-tiwala, which we just heard, he said, shay'un yasna'unahu, something that they make, yaz'umun, they claim, أنه يحبب المرأة إلى زوجها, that it makes the wife loves her husband more, والرجل إلى امرأته, and the man to his wife. So, this is all evil things. There's 3 more texts here. وروى الإمام أحمد عن رويفع. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he reported this from Ruwayfa, one of the companions of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, that he said, قال لي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, the messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم said to me, يا رويفع, he called him with his name, لعل الحياة ستطول بك فأخبر الناس أن من عقد لحيته أو تقلد وترا أو استنجى برجيع دابة أو عظم فإن محمدا صلى الله عليه وسلم بريء منه. Which means here the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, he said to him, O Ruwayfi', لعل الحياة ستطول بك, maybe life will make you stay for a long time. And he lived for a long time. He says maybe that you would live for a long period of time. فأخبر الناس, therefore inform the people. Prophet ﷺ first, he said that you would probably live a longer life, meaning after the Prophet ﷺ. So make sure that you inform the people. What is this important thing? أن من عقد لحيته. لحيته, his beard. عقد, that means he make a knot in his beard. This is something that the Arabs in the Jahiliyyah, they used to, when someone has a big beard, they would make a knot for many reasons, whether it's for arrogance, especially in war or something like this, it shows that he's of a status or something like this, or they would do it as a way to push away harm. They had some thoughts which is of nonsense whatsoever, that this is means of protection from evil eye or something like this. As some said, to make them look ugly, for example. When someone does this, he looks not very pleasant, so people won't give him evil eye, for example. Something like that. So he said, أَنَّ مَنْ عَقَدَ لِحْيَتَهُ, whoever does this thinking or believing that it has a physical effect when it's not, أَوْ تَقَلَّدَ وَتَرًا, or he hanged a watar, as we heard in the hadith before, whether it's on himself or on his animals, أَوْ اسْتَنْجَى بِرَجِيعِ دَابَّةٍ. Al-istinja is to clean oneself after defecating or urinating. So if someone uses رَجِيعَ دَابَّةٍ أَوْ عَظْمٍ, the droppings of the animals, whoever uses this, or bones to clean himself, which is both are forbidden. A person would say, why would someone do something like this? When you don't have means of cleaning, you find something, things can be different. And these things are very hard, so it's used like stones. But you can use stones, but not the bones, and not any of the droppings of the animals. And there's a wisdom behind it, as the Prophet ﷺ said, al-azm, or the bones, is the food of the jinn. They eat from it, and it's awfar lahman, and it's when they eat from it, it's full of meat for them. So they'll get angry with you. So leave it away. Don't use it and put najasa on it. But he left it, do not use this. You do not clean yourself with these 2 things. And with whatever mentioned before, فَإِنَّ مُحَمَّدًا بَرِيءٌ مِّنْهُ, because indeed the Prophet ﷺ will be bari. He distanced himself from him. He disloyal himself from him. So that means it's something that is against the deen. And al-bara'a, when you say ana bari'un min kulli muslim, like this, the like of this, that means what's the hukm of this action? That it's haram. If the Prophet ﷺ said something like this, that means the action, it's haram, and it's also one of the major sins, as the ulama they say. The fifth statement here, عن سعيد بن جبير قال, Sa'id ibn Jubair is the student of Abdullah ibn Abbas. So now you heard hadith, and you heard a statement of companions, and now a tabi'i, a student from Abdullah ibn Abbas, one of the major students of Abdullah ibn Abbas, the one that Al-Hajjaj killed. He says, من قطع تميمة من إنسان كان كعدل رقبة. He says, رواه وكيع. Whoever cuts a tamima, amulet, from a human being, the reward that he gets is like of freeing a slave. Is like freeing a slave. And this is something that basically that's what he says here, and he says rawahu waki', and this narration is weak, but again we've heard before about the removal of the tamima, and this, if someone is able to do that, this is a good deed, and Hudayfa radiallahu anhu, he did that. If you have authority, that mashallah, this is definitely for sure to be done. If you don't have authority, then to advise and to give that strength to the heart, because those who are having these things hanging, they have weakness in their hearts. They have their hearts attached, afraid of something that does not exist. So if you can help them out, after you advise them that these things has nothing to do with protection or anything like this, and if you don't want to remove it, let me do it. Let me do it for you. So if you're able that you would remove it from him, mashallah, this is a good thing. If he refuses, what can you say except to advise him? So, but he says here, كَعِدْلِ رَقَبَةٍ, as if you freed a slave, and there's the resemblance of that, as the ulama they say, even though the narration, when it's weak, they would still explain it. And the meaning of what's forbidden is still correct. But then a person, when he's hanging things like this, and he's been made to rely upon it, he is in this captivity of whatever he is hanging to, right? He's in that state of, he's been enslaved to it, right? So he needs to free himself from this slavery by cutting off these means, and to free himself by relying only upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is always the case when the hearts are relying upon other than Allah. They are in state of captivity, in state of being enslaved, and you have to be a slave. Either to be a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the most beautiful thing, or to enslave yourself to human beings and the creation of Allah. The last one, he says here, وَلَهُ عَنْ إِبْرَاهِيم, another narration from Ibrahim. Here, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, rahimahullah, from the Tabi'een, he says, كَانُوا يَكْرَهُونَ التَّمَائِمَ كُلَّهَا مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ وَغَيْرِ الْقُرْآنِ. That Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, rahimahullah, he says, كَانُوا, and Ibrahim al-Nakha'i from the Tabi'een, of course, and when he says كَانُوا, they used to, referring to the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, but he refers specifically to the ashab or the students or those who are around Abdullah ibn Mas'ud specifically, radiallahu anhu. So كانوا, they used to hate or dislike, which means forbade in some sense, all of the ruqa, whether it's, or all of the, what's the word that is mentioned here, at-tama'im, the charms or the amulets that they hang, kullaha, all of it, whether it's from the Qur'an or from other than the Qur'an. So it goes back again to what was mentioned about, if it's other than the Qur'an, of course, it's no differences of opinions. Anything that is other than the Qur'an, of course, it's haram. This is agreed upon, there's no differences of opinion. If it's only Qur'an, as we heard, some had said it's permissible, but he mentions here when they said about, they used to see that as it's still disliked, that means it's something to be forbidden, which is the correct opinion in this matter. And when they mention a statement of those who before them, this is how the ways of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu. Very briefly, the 9 points of benefit that he mentions here, tafsir al-ruqa, what's the meaning of al-ruqa? What's the meaning of the charms and the tamam and the amulets, as we heard before? Tafsir al-tiwala, what's the meaning of al-tiwala, the specific things between the husband and the wife? That all of these 3 things are from shirk, without any exception. And al-ruqya, number 4, the ruqya with the kalam al-haq, with the truth, when you say something based on the truth, to protect from evil eye or fever and the likes of this, it's not from the shirk, of course, it's a good thing. أن التميمة إذا كانت من القرآن, if the tamima, the amulet, is only from the Quran, the ulama had differences of opinions, whether it's from what's mentioned before or not. The awtar, the things that they hang around the animals, is to protect them from the evil eye. It's not permissible. It's from what's mentioned that this is from the shirk. Al-Wa'id al-Shadid, warning, severe warning for those who hang these types of things. The great reward for those who would cut these types of things because it's eliminating the shirk. And then the last point, that the kalam of Ibrahim Nakha'i, it does not oppose what's mentioned of the differences of opinions, because he meant by that Ashab Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So when he said Kanu yakrahun, he did not refer this to all of the companions, or I'm sorry, all the tabi'een. He just mentioned about Ashab Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, which is from the tabi'een, from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, that they would forbid this. But others, they would not forbid it. So hopefully, inshallah ta'ala, this is clear. So any questions or anything that is not clear? Right. If someone hangs only Quran, those who said that it's forbidden, they did not say that it's shirk. And the reason, of course, behind that is that the Quran is the speech of Allah. So it's not something that a person is relying upon a creation of Allah. This is the Quran, the speech of Allah. So that's why there is this. But then those who said it's forbidden because it was not known to the companions of Allah anhu, and the other reasons. It's a way, which is a way, definitely, for those who would do other things. No. This dua that the Prophet ﷺ would say to Al-Hasan and Hussein, just the dua like that. If they're with you, in front of you, you say أعيذكما or أعيذك or أعيذك if it's a female, or أعيذكم if it's plural. بكلمات الله التامة من كل شيطان وهمة ومن كل عين لامة. You can put your hands on their heads, and that's what it comes to ruqah. You can either say, or you can put your hand on their heads, or on their, if it's for pain, for example, you make dua and you put it on the place of pain. You can blow after you recite on them, especially if it's with Qur'an and things of that nature. But it's sufficient just with that dhikr to say it the way it is. And the Prophet ﷺ used to blow also some of the Qur'an in his hands and things of that nature. Now, now, the subject of blowing in water for the ruqyah. Some of the Salaf, they used to do something like this, and they put it in the category of using the Quran as means of cure, as a medicine, but not as a way of ibadah. There's difference between someone doing that as an act of worship. Acts of worship, we only take it from the way of the Prophet ﷺ. But if someone would, like writing even with saffron, some verses of the Quran and then dilute it in water and they would drink it, for example. Some would do these types of things in the category of seeking cure as medicine. So that's permissible to some, that's no problem. Especially if a person does it to himself instead of giving it to someone to do it. A person can do that and he can read, yes, this is permissible, as some used to do that. And some had mentioned that it's better to avoid it. It's not widespread of means, but you cannot say that it's forbidden because it's in the subject of seeking means of cure. Right. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. No. The hadith of the 70,000 in it, when the Prophet ﷺ was asked those who enter Jannah without reckoning, he said, هُمُ الَّذِينَ لَا يَسْتَرْقُونَ ولا يكتوون ولا يتطيرون وعلى ربهم يتوكلون. They don't seek ruqya, and they don't yaktawun, using fire for cure, like cauterizing or something like that. And they don't have a tiyara or pessimist about things. They don't see something and makes them tight inside or being pessimist of something, which is shirk actually. A tiyara, shirk. You see a bird and you become, oh, this is not going to work today because I saw a bird now flying this way or that way. It's all shirk because it's nothing. And the last thing that brings all of these things together, وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ, and upon their Lord they rely. So the word يَسْتَرْقُونَ, because in one of the narrations yarqun, but they said this word is shaz. That means it's not the real word that is used, because the Prophet ﷺ would make ruqya for himself. He would make ruqya for others. But what's mentioned in the hadith is that they don't ask for ruqya. So that's why, for example, if you see your brother is sick, you make ruqya on him. Don't wait for him to ask you for it. You make ruqya on him. This is fine. That does not take him away from this high level. If a person makes ruqya on himself, so making ruqya on yourself to someone else, this is all, does not take the person from being perfectly relying upon Allah. Seeking ruqya from others is permissible, but it's not from these characteristics of the 70,000, as they say, because it has some form of maybe attachment of the heart. When someone asks for someone to make ruqya for him, then Allah cure him. Then he would say, Alhamdulillah, the brother made ruqya for me. This is how. So there's that level of attachment and not leaving the matter to Allah. No. You can, but it's not the highest level of perfection. Yeah, but you can ask for ruqya. No. Right. Right. And now actually, is it the same when someone says make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for me? You can say that to someone alive, of course, not someone that is dead to his grave, because that's shirk. But if you ask someone to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you, it's different than asking for ruqya. Asking for ruqya, that means a person is sick, he's not feeling well, and he's asking to do a specific thing, which is not just a general dua. Asking people to make dua, it does not negate the perfection of the person, but it's still, as the ulama, they say, it's not the most perfect state. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمَّا يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ. Who would answer the muttarra, the one in need, if he calls upon Allah? So a person should make dua himself. And the other thing is that a brother, when he sees his brother, even if he feels well, it doesn't matter. He should make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without people asking him to make dua for him. And as Imam Ahmad and others, they would say there's 50 people that he makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for them on a daily basis. And it's part of the goodness that should be present, that a person is always making dua to others. So it's best to avoid, but it's not something that is haram. It's permissible. And even some of you would find chapters that it's permissible to ask from a righteous man to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you. It doesn't take the person away from this perfection, Allah. To accept payment for ruqya or to ask for payment to do ruqya for someone else, in principle, it's permissible. But whether this is the best thing that a person would do, and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is clear when they went to the hadith of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, when they went and they made ruqya on the men and they took something from them. But that's different than having this as a business, and especially if someone is given something, sure. But when you're making ruqya, that should not affect the strength of the heart that a person is relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's not doing that for money. He's doing that for the sake of Allah. And if someone gives something, the issue of asking, and even though the people, they use this hadith, in principle, yes, it's permissible because the hadith stated that the Prophet ﷺ approved their action. But when you look into the life of the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, the way that things are done by some, it's not really the way, it's an incident that happened, right? So we have to be careful, but again, nobody can say that this is not permissible or that it's evil or anything like that, because there's an evidence in that. And plus, a person has to be careful. These types of things, a person should deal with it from the people, those who are upon the Qur'an and the Sunnah, not those who are Dajjalin, or they're using all kinds of crazy stuff. No. Right. Right. The issue of asking someone to make dua, sometimes it becomes excessive, yes. And someone this morning was saying a person, he sent thousands of whatever money, but they're of a different religion. So alhamdulillah, it's not Muslims. For someone to bless whatever their son so that they pass an exam. It's crazy stuff. So it's something that it shows also the weakness sometimes of one's iman and relying upon Allah. Sometimes people, they would travel or would go out of their ways to go to that special person that they think that he is so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would go to them, please make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for me. This is something that should be avoided, and a person, he should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. If my slaves ask you about me, I'm near them. So that should not be done like this, because it can show that there's a disease in the heart, or a person's weak iman is making him do something like this. But if it happens at ease, without again going out of one's way, or let us call this person, let us do this. This is not the ways of the early generations of Islam. Sure, no problem. Yeah, it's okay. Right. Right. And the same thing, even though a person would say it's permissible in principle, but it's better to avoid the excessiveness of this. And some of the things, even when, which is very common, when you go, for example, you give charity to someone, and the person would say, thank you very much, what can I do for you? He says, brother, just make dua for me. It's better not to say that. It's better. Why? Because the ayah says that they, in Surah Al-Insan, that they don't ask for people jaza'an wala shukura. Those who give, they don't ask for recompense, and they don't ask for people to be grateful to them. When you're giving charity, you're not waiting for people to thank you, even though it's good from their side. This is one of the things where it goes not both ways. You do a good deed. Your manners towards someone is for the sake of Allah. If you're expecting that they will be kind to you because you're kind to them, this is not a good thing for you. But it's bad on them. If someone do a favor to them, they should be grateful. So when someone do kindness to you, it's your religious duty to reward them back. But the one that is doing the good, he should not expect that from them. Otherwise, he won't do the good. It goes both ways like that. So that's why they say, even do not ask them to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you, because you're doing it for the sake of Allah. But then they should, if someone do something nice to them, they say, may Allah reward you, jazakumullah khairan. It is from them, but you don't ask them for it. No. 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 The first question with regards to if you have a body part that hurts and you make ruqya, you put your hand on it. There's an authentic hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he says when it comes to the pain, you put your hands on a place where it's painful and you say Bismillah, Bismillah, Bismillah. أعوذ بعزة الله وقدرته من شر ما أجد وأحذر. I seek refuge in the izzah and the might and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the evil of what I'm finding and what I'm worried about. 7 times. You say Bismillah 3 times and you say that dhikr 7 times. It will go away what he's worried about. So this is something that the Prophet ﷺ said. And he said specifically to put your hands on the place that it hurts. So therefore, for this dhikr and other dhikr, or other dua in general, or Qur'an, reciting Qur'an on the part that it hurts, or blowing on it, or put your hands on it, this is a means of cure, which is one of the rights of the Qur'an upon us, with whatever a person has. So this is fine. The second thing is the athar from Umar radiallahu anhu, when he asked Al-Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, for al-istisqa, for rain. And this is an evidence that some people, they misunderstand it and they think that he was making or asking the shafa'ah from the makhluk or from the creation of Allah or from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Actually, the hadith is an evidence that refutes what they claim. Because Umar radiallahu anhu, he was on the minbar and he's few steps away from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam in his grave. And we have the uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they were asking for rain. And he said, Allahumma inna kunna nastashfi'u binabiyyik. We used to seek shafa'ah or intercession by your Prophet. Meaning when when the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam was alive. And now, وَالْآن نَحْنُ نَسْتَشْفِعُ بِالْعَبَّاسِ. And now we're seeking intercession from the Abbas. And then when he said that, and for those who do not, the ujma or the lack of understanding statements, sometimes it's a disastrous thing, linguistically and things like this. They took that literally, nastashfa', we seek an intercession. That means we can ask him directly or wipe your hand on it. This is not what it means. And it's very obvious in the evidence that after he said that, first of all, he did not, why didn't he say, oh Allah, we're nastashfa' binabiyyik? And the Prophet ﷺ in his grave, why didn't he continue? He should have said that according to them, and that's enough. That's enough for his dua. But he said, now we are making nastashfa' bil-Abbas. That means someone is alive. So Al-Abbas. And then what did the Abbas say? Or what happened afterwards? Was the end of it? No. Al-Abbas, he raised his hand and he made dua, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the rain. So that means what? With this context, that we're seeking intercession by the dua of the Abbas. So it was not by the Abbas and then the rain came and everything, it was done like that. He made dua. So that means also, nastashfi'u binabiyyik. We used to seek intercession with the Prophet ﷺ at his time. What did they used to do? The Prophet ﷺ would make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the rain, and the rain comes. So it's amazing how this athar or this tradition is used for something that is completely different. Actually, it's one of the evidence to prove the proper way of seeking the shafa'ah of those who are alive versus those who passed away. Anything else? So the question is, the woman is giving her necklace to the person that sells gold. He said, I'll take it, I'll melt it, and I'll reshape it to make it a different necklace, different design. He's not going to take anything away. He's not going to add anything in it, right? The same amount of gold. He's just reshaping it. And he's going to take money for the labor. Is that correct? This is fine. What's forbidden is when someone exchanges 2 pieces of gold and paying the difference. There's amwal ribawiyya that the Prophet ﷺ forbade for specific types of money or wealth, that it to be exchanged with paying the difference. Basically, it's money and gold and silver and the necessities of the food of the people, like the grain and so on, to preserve these necessities in the lives of the people, not to be tampered with. Meaning, if you have you want to exchange one piece of gold with another piece of gold. One is more expensive than the other. Is there a way out? Yes. You go to the jeweler and you sell what you have first, and you take the money for it. And if you leave, Assalamu alaikum, you're fine. And then after you take your money, then I want to purchase the new piece. This is permissible. But to make an exchange like a car, for example, it's permissible for cars, for a refrigerator, for whatever. But not in gold and silver, not in money, unless it's with conditions, unless it's different money. You cannot exchange dollar for dollars. You can exchange dollars for sterling, for example, right? But it has to be with the condition that it's yadan biyad, hand to hand. You cannot defer it with a later time. It has to be hand to hand. And in that case, it can be different in the amount because they're different. You cannot say $100 for 100 sterling. They're different. So the exchange, according to the exchange rate, well, has to be physically happening, or what comes into the categories of physically exchange. But that is, as far as this is what you mentioned, is okay, as far as it sounds like that. That's riba. It's usury. They need to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's it. No. But this is a sin has been committed. طيب وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك. بارك الله فيكم. جزاكم الله خير.